Arrived a little later. It's great to see you. And next Sunday we will be launching out. The summer's fun. When I first moved here from South Africa 22 years ago, I found the summers incredibly disheartening from a church point of view because there's so many people away at any given time. South Africa, the vacations were kind of spread between winter, which was June, July, and then the summers, which would be kind of everything but retail shuts down around Christmas, New Year, and they're endless vacations. Christmas Day is off. Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, is off. New Year's Day is off. The day after New Year's is off. Everyone is off all the time. So we had the skeleton staff, and we just had loads of fun, but it was kind of for 2 or 3 weeks, and that was that. And the summer, with so many people away at any given time, I've learned to work with it rather than against it. So we're going to build community. We're going to have some fun. We are going to go through a mini-series around the Lord's Prayer for about 8 weeks or so. We're going to throw in a little splash it with an evening of worship for those who are around and in town. We will have some time, kind of a prayer at the pier, just some fun community stuff amidst all of that. I have heard the rumors that there is an intramural volleyball competition. I have to say that having the Griffiths in our community probably makes us just a little more likely to dominate. But then they have got me, so that just takes about 10 points off their domination. But, this is our second Mother's Day, and we've crafted this evening, as much as we craft these spaces, around that. But I'm going to put my wife on the spot. Where are you, Meryl Diane? Where is she? Oh, hiding. My baby, would you leave your son's hand and just come here for a moment, please? I know, my love, you hate me for this, and then tonight you'll kiss me again and say, I hate you in such a loving way. This is our second Mother's Day. We're not really comfortable with pastor or more official titles. We kind of do the family thing a whole lot better. But I wondered if there's something as the mother of the community you'd love to say to them tonight. As our second Mother's Day, I'm stalling, so you can think.
No, I can think. I just think I'm going to cry.
Okay, my love.
So, we pretty much started alone, and I remember saying to Chris, are you crazy? Like, old people don't plant churches. Kind of it's a young person's thing. And within a very short space of time, God brought us 4 incredible interns, and the journey started. And we had no idea what Genesis would look like. And then God brought us these beautiful interns and then a whole bunch of Vanguard students, and it just grew. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Honestly, people say to me, well, how do you do it all? And you go to, I'm a therapist, and you plant a church, and honestly, it is a lot, and sometimes I feel like I'm not in both spaces well, but I cannot tell you the joy that I have to be here with you all on a Sunday. Honestly, I love each and every one of you. And it is such a privilege to be part of this community. On Thursday night, we had our little midweek, and I think we got to bed at about 11:30, whatever it was. I went to bed with the happiest heart. You know why? Because I sat around my little table. There were 5 girls, so we ended up breaking up and praying with one another. There were 5 of us that went real vulnerable and deep, and we got to pray with one another. And I can't tell you how much I love that space and this space. So I love you all. I'm very privileged to be part of this community.
Thank you, my love. Thank you. Community is a beautiful thing. Relationships are a beautiful thing. And my sadness when I arrived here 22 years ago was that church was so businesslike. I thought it's not a business. It's one of the only pictures or metaphors that isn't used to describe the church. The church is a bride and a community and a temple and a building and a family, an ecclesia, those who are called out to an adventure. It's an army, but it's never a business. And we have to intentionally undo any business leanings that come in, outside of good management, managing the affairs of the church well, of course. But thank you for buying into an adventure that's highly relational. We couldn't do it any other way. Well, if you've got your Bibles with you or your instrument of mass destruction, Isaiah, please, 49, and welcome again to those for whom Genesis is not your normal base. We are so delighted, so honored, mums and dads who are here. You can imagine many of you are in our shoes. You have kids our children's age. Our eldest daughter will be 33, and Dana, who's just left, she's got a gig to do, so she's 32, and then T has just turned 20. So it's the first time in 20 years we haven't got a teenager in our family. And then my grandson turns 13, so what the heck? Let's do this thing. All right, Isaiah 49, please. The background goes something like this. We're in a mini-series called Lessons in Transformation. I'm a history grad, I'm a history nerd, it's what I love. And yet I've never taken history as being one of the great avenues of truth. I've taken the scriptures, and obviously great and wonderful truths tucked away in the scriptures. But I became very curious with Patrick of Ireland in the 5th century, and the way, as much as we can glean from historical documents, how dramatically he took a nation of Celtic barbarians and brought the gospel to them in a very unique Irish way that he is celebrated today around shamrocks, which apparently he used, and there's some debate around that, as an illustration of the Trinity. And the Guinness beer, the monasteries made tons of beer, and so they took the best of his teaching and made it into a crazy, nutty, worldwide feast. And then last week we spent some time with John Wesley, the great Brit, voted as one of the 100 most influential Englishmen that ever lived in the 18th century. And we followed his story from the dismal failure that he had in the colonies to being a nation shaper and changer. And I just thought with Mother's Day, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and have the conversation. When we say conversation, it means we do a little official kind of instruction. But when we break up in smaller spaces during the week, we intentionally carve these stories under a narrative theology, and we allow ourselves to identify with pieces of the story. Brian did such a great job with ours on Thursday night. Isaiah 49, as we look at Mother Teresa and the remarkable way in which she brought transformation into the lives of many. We'll pick up in verse 13. Shout for joy, you heavens, rejoice, you earth, burst into song, you mountains. For the Lord comforts his people and will have compassion on his afflicted ones. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, the Lord has forgotten me. Please notice that. I'll get back to that in a moment. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you. This is a beautiful piece of poetry, prophetic, descriptive poetry. I have engraved you or tattooed you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. Your children hasten back, and those who laid you waste depart from you. Lift up your eyes and look around. All the children gather and come to you. Surely, as I live, declares the Lord, you will wear them all as ornaments. You will put them on like a bride. Do we have, Tyler, do we have Teresa's prayer? All right, thank you. This is a prayer that she prayed, I'm told, every day. And I'd like you to pray it with me. Dear Jesus, help me to spread thy fragrance everywhere I go. Flood my soul with thy spirit and love. Penetrate and possess my whole being so utterly that all my life may only be a radiance of thine. Shine through me and be so in me that every soul I come in contact with may feel thy presence in my soul. Let them look up and see no longer me, but only Jesus. Stay with me, and then I shall begin to shine as you shine, so to shine as to be a light to others. Amen. I want to go through a very brief timeline with you because it just gives rhythm and context to life. Really oversimplified is divided up into three, two 20-year and one 40-year window. We Protestants, have, I think, thrown the baby out with the bathwater because we've disliked Catholic traditions, some of them, and theologies. I think we have neglected the power of some of their stories. And so here is the timeline for this incredible woman. She was born August 26, 1910 in Skopje, the Republic of Macedonia, which I'll comment on in just a moment. Her father died 1919. She was 8 years old by political poisoning. We are told that he was fighting for the independence of their state. It was at that stage within the Ottoman Empire, and he was poisoned. She grew up with her mother and her sister, and it was on August the 15th, 1922, at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, when she was 12 years old, a pilgrimage she took regularly, and she sang in the school choir, and she went there and felt the call of God on her life, that she would marry Jesus in the church, and that she would live a life of surrender and sacrifice. At the age of 18, when she was old enough to be viewed as an adult, in the day 1928, she joined the Sisters of Loretta in the Loretta Abbey in Rathfarnham in Ireland. She went there because she wanted to learn how to speak English, and she wanted to join that particular brand of Catholicism, which was very focused on education, and particularly educating the disenfranchised. The next year she went to India and arrived in India in 1929, where she joined the convent, the Sisters of Loretta, and she served there for 20 years, 1928 to 1948. Please put into context the First World War, Second World War. She lived through two major global conflicts. It was on the road from Calcutta to the Himalayas, an annual pilgrimage where she went to have a retreat on the 10th of September, 1946. It was on that train that they now name after her, where she had what she called the calling within a calling. And although it took her a couple of years before the Vatican would approve her, she founded the Missionaries of Charity, which she ran from 1950 to 1997. So it's almost 40 years. And she died the 5th of September in 1997. She was given a funeral, a public funeral in India. Although not born in India, that's where she died and was greatly honored. And as I studied her life, and my studies are somewhat less in depth than it was with the others, I think there were some pieces that have been incredibly helpful, and I think will help shape us. I want you to please document and own the pieces that we have discovered. How God takes ordinary men and women and shapes them. Ladies, unfortunately, our stories, because God is Father, although there is a mother side to Him, of course, the Bible is often the account of men, and we who lead churches generally tend to be men, that you can sometimes stumble around wondering, well, where is the story that relates to me? And you're very gracious, and I'm incredibly grateful to God for your grace to hear anyway. But I think this is a beautiful story because we see from the outset a mother crafting the family culture. That's kind of my first little dive in. Mother Teresa's parents, Nicola and Drana, were of Albanian descent. Her father was an entrepreneur, and her mother seemed to have kind of worked in. It was a very middle-class journey until he was assassinated, as we've already seen, because he wanted the independence of Albania. So you can imagine this root of rebellion, in good rebellion, that was seeded. She watched her dad effectively die for the thing that mattered, the values that mattered. But as a 12-year-old, she suddenly left alone with her mother and with her sister in poverty. They were not rich. 8 years old, I apologize. The aftermath was not one of implosion, was not one of victimization. It was a mother who grabbed the moment, as best as I can discover in everything I've read, who grabbed the moment and said this: her house was always an open invitation for the city's destitute to come and eat with them. Her mother said, "My child, never eat a single mouthful unless you are sharing it with others." When Agnes asked who the people eating with them were, her mother uniformly responded, "Some of them are our relations, but all of them are our people." I remember going into a village in Gazakulu, southeastern Africa, And we'd finished doing a series of meetings. It was a meal time, and it was obviously a black community, kind of poorer black community. And we were eating, and with my Western mind, I'm embarrassed to say, I sat down and watched someone walk in off the street and sit down in a chair. Immediately, Cynthia Chauke, who was our host, Lucas and Cynthia, very dear friends, took him a meal. He ate, and then he left. When he left, I said, Lucas, who was that man? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, but why did you feed him? He said, because he came to my house. And I realized how our cluttered and complicated Western minds, based on invitation and very specifically identified sharing, was being blown apart by this village mindset of, and I quote Agnes's mother, some of them are our relations, but all of them are our people. And I want to say in the celebration of motherhood that this mother not only held the family together, but absolutely refused to drill in a sense of victimization. We are victims. Your father died. Why did he have to have such strong political convictions? Why didn't he think of us? Why was he so selfish? It seemed like none of those words in any of Mother Teresa's writings ever appeared. It was the celebration of what a mother put into her by her father's commitment to stand firm and strong, whatever the cost might be, and a mother's ability to take her humble means and to invite people into that space, no matter what the price tag might be. What I find particularly curious, and for a half a reason only, when she at 18 went to Ireland, she never saw her mother, never saw her sister again. That was incredibly curious for me. I do know that in the political change, which we'll go through in just a moment, her mother was not allowed to leave what became Albania. They would not give her a visa or a passport to travel. And so she died before she was able to see the fruit of her daughter's labor. I want to say to you mothers, you just don't know who you're mothering. Who would have thought this little short, I think she was about 4'8" or 4'11", this little girl who at the age of 12 said, I want to give myself to Jesus. I want to go to Ireland to learn. I want to go to India, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Who would have thought that mother would have said, yep, that's my girl. She's going to rock it. There was nothing compelling about Agnes. But a mother put things into her that the nations got to hear about. The second thing that was compelling for me about her story was many nations but one citizenship. Listen to this poor woman. She was born into the Ottoman Empire 1910 till 1912. She became a Serbian subject because of the volatility of that peninsula, 1912 to 1915. She became a Bulgarian subject, 1915 to 1918, a Yugoslavian subject, 1918 to 1943, a Yugoslavian citizen, 1943 to 1948, an Indian subject, 1948 to 1950, an Indian citizen from 1950 to 1997, an Albanian citizen, 1991 to 1997, and an honorary American citizen in 1996, the year before she died. Wow. Who was she? Who was she? This is what she said of herself. By blood, I'm Albanian. By citizenship, an Indian. By faith, I'm a Catholic nun. As to my calling, I belong to the world. As to my heart, I belong entirely to the heart of Jesus. I find that compelling because I do think, ladies and gentlemen, as one who has left my homeland, that I think it's one of the biggest steps that you and I can take as Jesus lovers is when we are prepared to forfeit as priority the nationhood that we were born into. There is a higher calling, and the calling is a yes to Jesus in a kingdom adventure. It is a higher calling. And I think sometimes we are compelled, through family maybe, to hold the low point. I'm first American, first South African, I'm both. No, I'm first a Jesus lover. Paul said it this way in Ephesians 2:19. Consequently, we are no longer foreigners or strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of His household. And I want to implore you to that story. When you open your hand and open your heart, it is an incredibly compelling narrative. Yes, I am a proudly born South African. Yes, I am a proudly adopted American. I'm an American by choice. You are not. I'm far richer than you. But there is a higher citizenship, and that's citizenship to the kingdom, where it's a yes to Jesus, and that often means no to many other pieces. I am so incredibly grateful that by function, I am both a South African and an American, but I don't feel fully either. When I go back to South Africa now, having been here for 22 years, I don't feel fully South African. When I'm here and I open my mouth, I don't feel fully American. I don't go to baseball games, but I love every sport imaginable. I'm not compelled by my kids having to do every sport and do everything that needs to happen, because there is a calling upon my life, our lives as a family, to a higher narrative, to a Jesus story. Now, of course, we need Christians in every avenue of society. Please don't mishear me. But there's something about her life that at least we have to sit up to and listen to and say, Jesus, am I more American or Canadian, or am I your kingdom above all else? I then lean into this story about finding her mother's heart. We read this beautiful passage. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget. See, I have engraved you on the palm of my hands. I've tattooed you onto the palm of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. You know, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say this part quickly? Because time, I really don't want to be too long, and the history geek in me gets going. But she found her mother's heart from the age of 12 at calling, and then at 18 when she went to Ireland, and then on to India. It's an amazing story. She goes to India to teach, and she arrives in Calcutta, where she has to do her initial training from kind of a young girl to nun to sister to mother. And she joins the school, the Loretta Sisters, and she grows from being a history geography teacher, go history, and she ends up running the school. I mean, it is amongst the poorest of the poor and the Bengali people. She learns Bengali, she learns Hindi, she obviously learns English, Albanian. She speaks 5 different languages. And she's at the pinnacle. That's the point I'm trying to make. She is now running a school for girls who are of the poorest families, who cannot afford private schooling, and she's touching the lives of everything. Isn't that a noble cause? Isn't that enough to say, this is my life, this is what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 20 years. What a noble cause. What a powerful moment. And then the jolly train trip. Sometimes, dear friends, God has to pull us out of what is good to put us into what is best. And those around us will not understand. It took the Vatican over a year and a half to accept her movement out of the Sisters of Loretta and her incredible success as the principal of this girls-only school amongst the Bengalis, to embrace the fact that she had this nebulous call to the poorest of the poor. Sometimes God will require us to give over the thing that is most dear. I know the day it happened to me. I was 19 years old. I was playing cricket at a sub-professional level. I don't know how to describe it to you. It's so different. I just bought all my kit, my helmet and my box and my pads and my bat, and I was playing with international sportsmen. And God said to me, and I fought with him. I said, God, you can't do this to me. This is my identity. This is how people know me. This is how my Father respects me. If you take this, what will you give me? You won't know till you give it. It's like the baton in a relay race. You're not going to get the next one till you hand this one over. It's that moment of prophetic pregnancy where I am so vulnerable, because if I give away the thing I'm really good at, what will I get in return? Which leads us into what she found, what she discovered. September the 10th, 1946, at the end of the war. She experienced the second calling. She was riding on the train from Calcutta to the Himalayas when the Lord spoke to her and told her to abandon teaching in the slums of Calcutta. Can you think of anything more foolish? I'm sure they said to her, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're on your way to your vacation, don't make a decision now. But when she accepted a Nobel Peace Prize in 1979, she said this, I chose the poverty of our poor people. I'm grateful to receive this prize in the name of the hungry, the naked, the homeless, of the crippled, the blind, the lepers, of all those who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society. People have become a burden to the society and shunned by everyone else. I'm studying this, excuse me, and I discover an interview with my favorite New York Times journalist, David Brooks. So I instantly order the book. I've not finished reading it, but I want to tell you my understanding of what I think he says here. And I'm saying that only because I don't want to dishonor his content by my interpretation. His thesis. He says, most of us live our lives based on the first mountain. The first mountain is that place where family, culture, and self imposes on us what we should live. And he said, when we get to that first mountain, tragically, we find it isn't what they thought or what they told us it would be. Culture told me I must get an education. Family demanded I go to that school or achieve that level or get that amount of money. And he said what happens, and it happened to him. That's how he knows. And he calls himself a wandering Jew. He got to the top of his profession as a journalist with the New York Times, writing some profound articles, making huge impact in his writings. But he gets to the top and he loses his marriage. His kids don't speak to him. And he suddenly realizes, I got to the top of my mountain, and now what? It has not given me what I thought I need or should deserve by being there. And then he speaks of the journey to the second mountain. And that second mountain, he says, is the reason why you were born. When it's not driven by the idea of what culture and family, others, and self imposes on us, a life we're supposed to live, it's that dramatic moment where we say no to that. It's that dramatic moment where we realize there's a reason beyond this that I have to live. One of Merrill's cohorts as a therapist was a family lawyer, did all the legal process and became a lawyer to deal with divorces. And he realized that's not first mountain. See, become a lawyer, go to the top, it's going to make lots of money, go to the right schools. And he gets to the first mountain, he realized that's not where I should be. I don't want to do this to get lots of money and to separate people. I want to do this to heal marriages. And he starts again. Goes back to grad school and becomes a marriage and family therapist. We had some time with him just the other day, an incredible man. A man who has found the second mountain, but had to leave the first. Many years ago, I heard the story of Tony Campolo, professor at Northeastern University. And recalls one day gets a phone from a mother who's desperate. Her son was a professor with Campolo. And he had walked into the dean's office one day, resigned. And Tony had been aware that it had happened, but wasn't quite sure what he was doing. And the mother says to him, my son is a postman, a PhD postman. That's fine, it's just the Lord. He's saying we're doing fine. And she says, please go and speak some sense into his head. So he tracks him down and he sits with him at the end of the day, and he's wired. But he's wired not through addictions, but through caffeine. And he says to him, what on earth are you doing? He says, I am the most qualified postman at our post office. He said, but when I get into my cart at the beginning of the day, he said, I drop the mail off into people's homes, and there's Mrs. So-and-so, and she's 80, and her kids don't phone her. No one cares for her. So I just go in for a cup of coffee, and I have a cup of coffee with her. And then she tells me a story. Then I realize I'm running late, and I go down the road, and there's Mr. So-and-so. He had to have his leg amputated, and he's got a story to tell, but no one wants to listen because they've heard the story many times before. So I sit and listen to him. And he said, I start earlier than everyone. I get back to the post office later than everyone. He said, I'm as high as a kite on caffeine, but this is what I was born to do. He found his second mountain. It's a brutal journey when we move away from the thing that we thought we should do, only to discover it brings no real lasting sense of transcendent satisfaction. To begin again and to do the thing for which we are most fully alive. Let me land with some honesty. Mother Teresa is often known for the houses she started, and the statistics are compelling. I'll read this to you, just give you some idea. The congregation, her Mothers of Charity, now manages homes for people who are dying of HIV/AIDS. Dana was sat with a man. She took a year off, and after she graduated from Biola and went, and amongst other things, spent some time in working in Baragwanath Hospital, which is probably one of the darkest hospitals in South Africa. Least funded, least resourced. And she will tell you one of the most profound moments she had was befriending a man who was dying of HIV/AIDS and spending every day with him until he passed away. And I believe, if my memory serves me right, dads can get quite dramatic and overtell the story, but I think he died in her presence. And she said there was nothing more compelling than that moment. People who are dying of HIV/AIDS, leprosy and tuberculosis. It runs soup kitchens, dispensaries, mobile clinics, children and family counseling programs, as well as orphanages, schools. Members take vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience, and profess a fourth vow to give wholehearted free service to the poorest of the poor. Forgive my cross language, who the hell does that? Someone who is absolutely persuaded of the love of Jesus for those we want to dispense with. We want to give away. We wish they would just go away. But there are three things that I want to land with the enemies she had to fight. And the first was her own darkness and doubt. I want to read this and then comment. Privately, Teresa experienced doubts and struggle in her own religious belief, which lasted nearly 50 years. Nearly 50 years she wrestled with her own doubts. There were times she felt no sense of the presence of God whatsoever. She wrote in her journal and wrote in there, she hopes that no one will ever read this. And it's now in the documents of her history. Where is my faith? Even deep down, right in there is nothing but emptiness and darkness. My God, how painful is this unknown pain? I have no faith. I dare not utter the words and thoughts that crowd in my heart and make me suffer untold glory. If there be God, please forgive me. When I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is such convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my very soul. Why do I tell this? Because we can sometimes be foolhardy enough to look at us preachers who can sometimes, I hope, tell a compelling story, share a compelling scripture, and we're left feeling so insipid and weak and inconsequential because of our own doubts and aspirations. We preachers have to be far more honest about our own wrestles and struggles. We have to be far more truthful in the pain that our soul goes through, just like yours, and maybe sometimes more so. I don't think there is true transformation until we are honest about the barrenness of our own convictions. And it's not something we have to fear. Isn't it amazing, folks? Just before Jesus went up and he was plucked up in ascension, it said that they met him on the Mount of Ascension. It said that they believed, but many doubted. Like you, I've said, man, if only I see Jesus, I would love to see him. I'd love to open my eyes and see his kind eyes. I do. I want to look at his smile, because I think the smile will ignite a flame in me, unlike Tolstoy's writings. Just this incredible sense of, wow. I do want to sidle up to him and feel his nail-scarred hands. I do. I do want to feel the side where they pierced him. I do want to feel where they drilled those spikes through his ankles. It wasn't through flesh, it was brutal torture. But some saw it and doubted. We are in good company. Faith is not the ability to answer every question. It's the ability to be obedient to every command. That's what faith is. We all want to change the world, don't we? I do, one person at a time. But it's not going to come without doubt and darkness. In the very depths of our own soul, we ask questions for which we cannot find answers, and that is okay. Let me land with one more. An anti-theist's critique. Christopher Hitchens, who's probably one of the most vocal atheists, although he says he's an anti-theist, wrote a book called The Missionary Position, Mother Teresa, Theory and Practice in 1995. His accusation against her was sublime. Some of it was, according to critics, I've not read the book, was not loaded with fact and content. It was more an emotionally driven reaction to what she was doing. And if time allowed, I'd love to go into that because there's some interesting conversations he raised. But this is where I land. Let me quote it so I do a good job. It was by talking to her that I discovered, and she assured me, she wasn't working to alleviate poverty, he said. She was working to expand the number of Catholics. She said, I'm not a social worker. I don't do it for this reason. I do it for Christ. I do it for the church. I love the fact that even in the pain of her own darkness and doubt, she never lost sight of the fact that if we do not settle the question of transcendence with those we love, we're simply giving them a slightly better life down here. I see God in every human being. When I wash the leper's wounds, I feel like I'm nursing the Lord himself. Is it not a beautiful experience? You know, folks, as I close, the mother's role, you ladies are incredible. Watching my daughter now, the little belly beginning to show, seeing the movement ever so slightly. The can I wear a bikini this summer question comes up. Little grubber, as she has so wonderfully called him. It's a beautiful thing. But we don't know who that little boy is. And when you came out of your mother's womb, they didn't know what you would become. But mothers with diligence, with love, affection, with persistence, and sometimes dogged perseverance drilled into you values that they deemed were appropriate. And for that we are incredibly grateful. They may not know your name, they may not know your mother's name, but maybe one day they'll know yours. There is a second mountain, ladies and gentlemen, for all of us. It's a painful journey to get there, but it's a beautiful place to land. I wanted Meryl to be up here because I wanted you to feel her heart. This was not our first choice, meaning we didn't say, okay, God, we'll plant another church. It was when God burst into our hearts and the question was asked, can you start with a room full of brand new relationships? And we looked at each other, broken people sometimes, limping people sometimes, hurting people sometimes, who won't trust, who won't embrace. And we looked at each other and said, yeah, we can do that one more time. That second mountain is a beautiful place, but it does demand we leave the first mountain. It's seductive according to Pilgrim's Progress, but it never, ever produces what it promises. And lastly, the joy of it all is we do it for the sake of Jesus. Listen, what she did is unbelievable. One of her students became her first fellow nun. When they took off the Sisters of Loretto garment and she put her very characteristic white sari on with the blue trimmings, one of her students said, can I join you? And they had no money. No money. No money. Not for food, not for a house, not for rags to wash wounds, dress them, no bandages, nothing. But there's something exquisite about this. I do it for the sake of Christ. This Christianity is not what is often presented as a way to find a pleasant middle-class existence. This is a Christianity that requires us to die in order to live, to give in order to receive, to offer kindness in the face of persecution and rebuke, praise when accusation comes freely and readily from a rich anti-theist sitting in his UK home with millions of money. He goes to the streets of Calcutta to tear to pieces a woman who sits wiping the wounds of her leper. It's a beautiful story. Let's pray together. Tyler, can you join me? I think we need to just land with a song of praise. Do you mind? A song of worship. Just one would be good. Would you open your hands? I learned this from Todd Proctor at Rock Harbor. It's a kind of cool thing to do. I'm not as cool as Todd, but it's a cool thing to do. We are astounded at your love for us. We don't always feel it, we don't always sense it, we don't always see it, we don't always know it. Forgiveness is a beautiful word, it's a big word, but we don't always embrace it. And somehow amidst this short little Albanian woman who took on the world's organizations, fought her fight, got a hero's endorsement. I can only imagine the raucous nature of heaven when the elevator opened and she walked out in all her humility and her hardened face by the years of walking the streets of Calcutta, picking up every broken, dying, forgotten person. And I suspect Jesus would get off the throne and he would run to her. And I suspect she would say, "Don't hug me, Jesus. There are others more needy than I." I think he would pick her up and hold her. Because what you do to the least of these, you do as unto me. Father, I thank you for the many second mountains in the room. She was 40 years old after 20 incredible years as a school teacher and then a headmistress. And you gave her one more assignment on the train from Calcutta. 1946. We stood with hands open and available. Tyler's just going to sing over us. We're not going to stand. We'll use it as a moment of meditation and reflection as he sings.